latest episode of Customer Insights with Francis and Danielle, a series dedicated to helping our customers address common questions and trends that they encounter as they support their learners and corporations. My name's Francis van Spijkeren, and I look after customer success at getAbstract in Europe.
And my name's Danielle Goodrum, and I'm the VP Client Services in North America. Today, we're going to kick off a conversation I think is quite overdue, Francis. I'm excited to have it. I think it's something that is top of mind for a lot of corporations, and that is the topic of well-being and burnout. I think it's very important that we have this conversation, and for corporations around the world to have it, to really normalize the conversation that they're focused on helping their employees not only recognize the impact that burnout has on them, but as well as helping them to identify how to mitigate and to fix those burnout issues using well-being strategies from a corporate and individual level. So the term burnout was first diagnosed by a psychologist in 1974. And by the symptoms, but the symptoms have been very prevalent for generations before that. And I think it's something that, as we talk through it, more people will recognize them, as well as understand that how the differences and external factors can impact them. So the term burnout, as defined in the summary, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, is a physical or mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. The author goes in to explain how internal factors and external factors can both contribute to burnout. And while this article might focus on a specific generation, a lot of the symptoms are experienced by anyone, no matter their age. So I think it's very important to have this conversation again, to really normalize it. It's something that we're all dealing with, no matter our age, no matter our location in the world. And it's something that employees as well as corporations are really focused on helping to maintain a healthy lifestyle and to quickly resolve the issues that employees might have at their workplace.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Danielle. I totally agree. And do you think organizations should be more worried about burnout this year than maybe they have been before?
That's a great question, Francis. And I think we can all agree that 2020 has been an unprecedented year. And the impact that it's had or will have in our lives is something that we can't quite measure at this point. As previously mentioned, burnout is not a new diagnosis. So no matter what's happening in 2020, whether it's this year or another, it's something that corporations should be mindful of. However, since there are external factors that lead to people experiencing burnout, we can start to draw conclusions that more people throughout this year are going to experience burnout, whether they already have or they're going to. So some of those external factors, just to point them out, are financial stress, increased workload, and uncontrollable changes, just to name a few. A study recently conducted by SHRM notes that many people are currently suffering from burnout, but they might not just know it. It can show itself in many forms. So before this complete collapse, whether it's physical or mental, there can be things where you're less engaged at work, you're focusing more on your workload and letting your personal life responsibilities kind of fall by the wayside. So I think it's important for us to all be self-aware and knowledgeable of what burnout looks like throughout our lives, so we can obviously make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. So looking at this year, it might be an unprecedented year, but with very similar external factors that may lead to these higher burnout rates. It's important for us to know that as a corporation, recognize that we might know that there's a pandemic going on, whether it's this year or another year, but we don't always know what's happening in someone's personal lives. So because we know that there's more stress this year, doesn't mean there should be more focus on it. It should just mean that we should put these resources and again, have these conversations regularly so employees who are experiencing these factors of burnout can deal with them and be more well-rounded in how they approach stress and manage it on a personal and professional level.
And what do you think are some of the ways that people prevent or try to treat burnout?
So there's good news. Like I said, the more aware that you are of the symptoms of burnout, and that can be in general, looking, as a workplace, understanding what it looks like in your employees, and on a personal level, being very self-aware of how you are handling stress and when you need to take a step back and really to focus on how you can prioritize your health in that sense. There's a great summary that recently came out. It's called Extinguish Burnout, and it's a practical guide to prevention and recovery. And I think, Francis, our summaries are great for so many different reasons, but this one really gives you some practical steps to put in place to make sure that you're handling burnout and hopefully preventing it from happening as often as it might. So this is an abbreviated list, and I encourage everyone to read the full summary, but I highlighted 4 items here. So the first one being prioritize your mental health care as much as you do your physical. So as you would schedule time to go to the gym, you should schedule time for things that would help you on your psychological side. So hobbies and spending time with friends and having good conversation are 2 examples of what you can do there. The second one is foster a healthy sense of self-esteem. And this can be done by getting feedback from people you trust, as well as acknowledge your progress. Don't be too hard on yourself and really look at where you started from and where you're going, and not just always focus only on the end goal. The third one is develop a coping strategy to build resilience. Stress is going to happen, changes are going to happen, but the more that we can handle these things and cope with stress and problems will help us thrive and stay positive in that sense. And the fourth one is get a perspective on your perspective. And I thought this one was interesting. So it really talks about knowing your blind spots. We all have them. And it's when you have this network of people that you trust, it's a great way for you to get more specific feedback. So talking to people that you trust about what they view are your blind spots, as well as how they view that you're progressing towards your goals. And many times we misevaluate ourselves. We're harder on ourselves than we are on other people. So getting that outside perspective is really helpful to understanding where you are currently during your goals.
And I smile a lot at that insight, because that's actually something that, Danielle, I use you for personally in my getAbstract journey, and in that we often try to share those perspectives. So that's why I was definitely smiling at that last point. And if you think about it on a corporate level, what do you think are the things that can be done from that perspective with the focus on burnout?
I love this question, Francis, because I think it's very important for corporations to understand that there's 2 people that are in this game per se. So you have the individual who also have corporations, knowing that there's external factors that go into it, should start to develop a culture that supports your employees and hopefully prevent burnout. So a few examples are providing well-being resources for your employees, and I will keep that light because I know, Francis, you're going to go into that in a little bit. Create a culture of transparency and continuous feedback. So this allows your employees to give their managers and their leaders a little bit of insight of how they're feeling. If they feel overwhelmed, if they feel that their workload is unmanageable at that point. Fostering the cultures that they can feel comfortable having these conversations means they can start to prevent burnout from happening. And then I think it's important for corporations to encourage employees to take time for themselves. I always call them mental health breaks, and they can be days off completely, vacations. It could be a walk, or just really making sure that they focus on, again, adding those personal parts of your life that make you happy, physical activity, time off with friends and family. So I think it's a very 2-sided approach, an individual and corporate side. But I'd love to hear some of your findings on well-being, Francis, and how organizations in their space can help create a culture of well-being and put in initiatives for their employees to have a more cohesive well-being programs and push within their corporations.
And I think it's a really natural progression also now to maybe talk more generally about well-being. I mean, there are lots of different aspects to well-being, and we hope that actually if you have great personal well-being, or if you're working towards that, having that well-being or focus on well-being, you hopefully avoid some of the situations that you just talked about before. So I think it's really nice to talk more generally about well-being as well. For me, it's a very timely but refreshing insight to see how much the topic is coming up in organizations. I mean, I don't know if everyone else will agree with me, but even if I look at my LinkedIn feed, there's so many great things people are sharing around well-being, around personal health, and those kind of topics. And it's really refreshing to see how often that's coming up. And maybe you say that this is an impact of kind of key issues like stress, like change in organizations, like things that are happening now. Although from my perspective, it's just really nice to see that the topic of well-being is at the forefront of people's minds. And from an organizational perspective, I'd say it's definitely not a new concept, right? I mean, we all know that if we have happy, motivated people, that it's great for business. Right. But I think the real shift is also that I've seen in the last couple of years is really people saying, actually, from an individual and team perspective, that focus on the importance of well-being, and those people also seeing that their organizations take that seriously as well. And I think that's just really refreshing to see.
No, that's great insight. And just so that we're all on the same playing field here, perhaps you can describe what exactly you mean by the term well-being.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because when I was preparing to say, okay, we're going to talk a little bit about well-being, and it's a topic request we get a lot from customers, how can we support employees in that area? I actually took a step back and I thought to myself, okay, well, what do we classify as well-being and what do we put under that category? So I actually looked it up in a dictionary, purely the word, and what what the dictionary says is it's a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. And I really liked the simplification of that. It just made me kind of not necessarily just think about it as a buzzword, to really think about what it means. And of course, the challenging part of that is that we are all different. We're motivated by different things or find happiness in different places. And therefore, I think that also gives an organization a challenge to consider how do they best support that well-being of their employees, because everybody has different needs and definitions of what that means. And if I think really more on the lines of how organizations and teams can support the well-being of their employees, the individual nature of well-being is what makes it also the perfect candidate for looking at the options of self-developed learning and supporting tools. And I really see the role of the organization there is about creating awareness for different types of well-being and the importance of that well-being and considering it for their employees, and really showing that there are options and opportunities to help people either stay on track, grow, or even help others with that well-being at work. And the organization really needs to ensure that the right tools and resources are then easily reachable and accessible to be used across a wide range of different scenarios in that kind of well-being space. And I think that's what I've seen also from a lot of organizations, the real focus on that area. And then maybe from a team leader or manager perspective, I think there are a lot of good examples on how you can infuse that nature of well-being into your teams. So I looked at one of the titles in the library that we have that's called Workplace Wellness That Works by Laura Putman. And she gives a lot of great tips from a manager perspective of really how you can start to embed that culture of well-being in your team. So some of my highlights here, she talks about being an enthusiastic role model for healthy behavior, inspiring others to change. And I think that's a great tip for a manager. If you want your team to also kind of have that great balance, you also need to show that yourself as a manager and be enthusiastic, set a great example. Another point, positive workplaces provide feedback and help other people get what they need in order to do their jobs, socialize, grow, and find fulfillment. So you mentioned a little bit before about those regular conversations, Danielle. And I think that's also, as a manager, where you can start to identify where there might be a problem and where you might be able to put someone in the right direction. So maybe it's connecting team members that might have had a similar challenge, or it's noticing the fact that maybe someone didn't integrate as well as other people and thinking about, well, are there new teams of new starters that you could connect them with? But having those conversations is where you're going to see those things that you can perhaps help with as a manager. And it's obviously not your job to be a counselor or to help someone solve their problem. But if you can help them deal with some of those challenges that they may be having in the workplace that might help them deal with some of those challenges, then you're going to help them move that step forward. A very practical tip that I like as well. The title also talks about teaching people to break goals down into small steps. I think we all know that feeling where you just can't get started on something and you put it off and you put it off because you don't know what you have to do. And we all know it. That starts to build stress. It starts to build, and then you avoid it even longer. So I think as a manager, if you can help someone break something that seems unachievable down into something that actually they see how they could get started, it's really going to help with that feeling of motivation and wellness in the workplace as well. And I think the last tip that she really shares is also about sharing wellness strategies. And it's similar to the first, but actually, you talked about at the beginning, sharing when you're taking a bit of time and space, but share that with people so that they know that that's acceptable and that's okay, or they can see, oh, maybe I could also do something like that. And I think that sharing mentality is really important in terms of how we deal with the challenge as a whole.
Oh, those are really good tips, Frances. So many of the abstracts on well-being and happiness focus on the individual. And that's how you also introduce the current shift in well-being changes. What reading recommendations would you make on focusing on this angle?
No, I think when you look on getAbstract, there's a lot of different abstracts that cover different areas of well-being. But a few I would recommend. There's a title that I would say is kind of a classic title on the topic of happiness, and it's called The 5 Thieves of Happiness by John Izzo. And it's really a great example showing that happiness exists in every person. You don't have to acquire it from somewhere. It already exists, but it's just about finding what that is and putting it into effect. And I find this for me a great kind of optimistic, but also very accessible title for everybody. So for me, it's one of my favorites on that topic of happiness. Maybe with a slightly different focus, maybe a bit in terms of goals and how you meet those goals, whether those are private or professional goals, whether it's I want to go to the gym more often and I need to put that habit into place, or it's more professional related, is a title called Commit to Win by Heidi Reeder. And again, very practical tips, and also touches on this point of breaking down challenges. So for me, that's a really nice one for maybe people that are struggling to motivate themselves towards those specific goals that maybe they've set under that wellness umbrella. And a brand new title that I really love, it's called Blaze Your Own Trail. And this, I think, really picks up on that individual nature and shares some nice examples of different possibilities. I mean, a lot of the decisions we make personally or in our private lives, it can be hard to make those decisions. And often the outcomes of those decisions are always going to be difficult, whichever decision you take. And I think this is a great title that shows some sort of different paths that different people have taken, and it's very relatable too. And I think making sure you look after your own personal well-being on the way when you make these decisions, it very much gives you the resilience to cope and handle the challenges that will come up for all of us. And, as I mentioned before, I think there are a lot of different abstracts in the library that deal with different parts of workplace wellness and well-being. And I really encourage kind of everyone to go and have a look. But it stems all the way from things about health and fitness, to goal setting, to stress management, to confidence building, even to things like yoga and meditation. So I think it's as it's such a personal topic, it's great to be able to explore and find some of the abstracts that might support you from a more personal perspective. And maybe before we finish, maybe my key takeaway from what you shared, Danielle, and what I shared would be just to step back and consider the importance of your own well-being and the well-being of your team, and maybe even just consider that one small one small change that might help you move towards it. It doesn't have to be something massive. And so that's perhaps my takeaway and my reflection on us really talking about the topic of well-being.
Yeah. No, that's a great takeaway, Frances.
Perfect. So I think from our side, Danielle, that's about it for this month's session. So I really hope you found some useful insights and some abstract recommendations, and we really hope to see you again soon.
Yep. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.